subject today. And this book about a bang for the buck is going to get released on 24th November, which is 3 days or 4 days from now. Especially on the integration part, today when you talk about any financial company, there are only two assets. One is the human assets, another is the financial assets. If you talk about another manufacturing company, you have products, quality of product. Here, there is financial balance sheet, and the people who run that balance sheet. So when you do integrate to organization from a balance sheet perspective, it is uppermost important that the people and the culture of two organizations also get integrated. When I think each organization typically over a period of time develop their own culture, own way of working, own ethics which is embedded into the organization, and two organizations come to think there is always the best practices which each other organization can imbibe from each other. This is where I think HDFC Bank realized, saying that it's not an acquired organization and an acquiring organization, but the best part is what is good in the acquired organization or the organization which get merged has got strong positive ways in which can be taken to an organization which is acquiring it or getting merged with. I think I have seen the integration process from close quarters, and wherever, as far as even the process is concerned, it was always believed in my organization that the best process and the best logic should win. So the best process are those which are in the long run cost effective, on which are customer centric processes. If these two tests pass, then in which organization this was being followed is immaterial. So as an internal audit, when we look at various processes, it is very easy for organization which is acquiring or getting the organization which get merged with your entity, it say that our processes are the best or the best which we can think other follow. But in the process, we lose out some good practices which we could have acquired and imbibed and made use of without paying any consultancy fees to the consultant, which otherwise you will get to know the best practices or a global best practices or the best practices in another organization. So keeping an open mind is very important. The challenges which you normally encounter in organization of when you do merger, there is a challenge, I think, one which Tapan has started with saying what is an accent problem in, say, his experience in Australia. Before that, there are 4 things which affect actually the multicultural issues, which is one which is direct and indirect communication. Suppose your organization, which typically of an American thing, which direct, there is nothing you need to find meaning out of below the sentences, where there is direct communication. But if an organization which is getting acquired as believe in indirect communication, more refined way of putting things rather than not directly communicating, that could be a big challenge between a direct communication and an indirect communication. As an organization, we need to keep this, there could be different style of communication. Doesn't mean that the organization which believes or the people in that organization does an indirect communication are not effective. You may miss the biggest opportunity by downplaying or wishing away the organization which has got an indirect communication. Second aspect is on the accent and the command on the language, which is also one of the biggest challenges, which is on the fluency and accent. More so in a multi organization where there is various parts of geography, like Tapan was mentioning about Australia. When you go to US, for them to understand the accent, it takes maybe, I would take 10 to 15 days to get used to that accent. Similarly, when we even go from an Indian thing, when we actually go from a South India to North India, I'm sure we would have seen in a lot of spellings how they spell certain common things, and the signboards which we put probably conveys you different meaning altogether. So the language and the fluency also creates a barrier or a challenge in an integration process. The fourth aspect is on the differing attitude toward hierarchy and authority. Here, clearly, when an organization which actually follows certain hierarchical process towards authority, and an acquired organization, if it is a flat structure and they don't have such thing, it creates huge amount of challenge in integrating that. We need to recognize that, and that's why HDFC Bank, we realize that how the structure of the flat, or whether there is an hierarchical approach similar to what HDFC Bank was. Another thing is the speed of decision-making process. Two organizations can have a very contrasting style of decision-making. Like, there has been an article in Harvard Business where they say American type of firms are very quick in making decisions, whereas in a Japanese or a Korean environment, they will do a lot of studies, go back, discuss. Between a business deal between an American discussing with a Korean company, they would say that the Koreans are too slow to react, but they may have their own process of validating, getting a bigger picture, whereas an American will find quick to take a decision. But these are only styles. But if we recognize these cultural differences between a particular area or a particular organization doing that, and start rectifying those and imbibing those and integrating with your thing, probably you will be better off getting the best of both, rather than having a notion that that organization is a very slow moving organization. That organization doesn't take a decision, whereas we are too fast to take a decision. Maybe an organization which is too fast to take a decision has not considered overweighingly other aspects. Maybe the other organization are good at it. Maybe the mix of both, looking at certain decision which is quick to take, certain decision which is better to actually take informed, collective, and discussed decisions are better. During this tenure from 94 to HDFC Bank was there, started in 94, and we are in 2000, which is 18 years. I've seen at least 5 banks getting merged with HDFC Bank. One, the first 2000 in the Times Bank, which I talked about in the book which is coming, and you can read that. In 2009-10, we had the Centurion Bank, which got merged with HDFC Bank, and Centurion Bank itself was a merged entity of Bank of Punjab, Centurion Bank, Lord Krishna Bank, and one other bank, Bank of Muscat. So it was a huge challenge to have all these organizations coming from different cultural background. Like Lord Krishna Bank was an old private sector bank. The Centurion Bank is morely a Western India bank. Bank of Punjab was more a north-based bank, whereas Bank of Muscat was a single branch. So where we see very huge cultural differences between even a single bank, where large part of the branch is from north, some part of the from west, and Lord Krishna Bank, which is basically a Kerala-based branch. So actually integrating more challenges is not on the system process, but understanding the cultural orientation of people from, say, different parts of the country, which is in India, which is a part of Kerala, part of Punjab, part of Western India. So as an internal audit, if you have to actually go and study processes and certain things where you actually integrated two organizations, you will really see a distinct way in which people conduct, people orient themselves, and that is where the challenge comes to actually take these things to build in your internal audit process and give them time for them to actually integrate with your organization. And in this process, keep an open mind that these organizations also have some of the best practices process and the people around you. So by doing this integration both from process and a culture basis, we can not only retain the best practices, but also give an opportunity to retain the best talent, which is the important aspect of any integration or merger. I think in HDFC Bank, I've seen 2 mergers, and we have been extremely successful in retaining some of the best talents we have taken. Even in this book, which is written, which I will just read out few sentences, which rather than me telling something, because this is something going to get published and you will read it, and which also articulate the stance which HDFC Bank has been taking. I just read about the integration. Not all senior employees left the bank. Quite a few stayed back with large responsibilities. And it was this, when the merger was announced, the treasurer of HDFC Bank was mentioning, I went straight to the dealing room of Times Bank and I told the guys, I knew the treasurer Sudhir Joshi and I had worked with him in an RBI committee. I did not want any of them to leave. I required people and they did not believe me. I told them, just because HDFC Bank is taking over your bank doesn't mean that you guys will have to report to HDFC Bank people. I am going to be very clear that whatever is best suited for the job will be running it. But a lot of HDFC Bank, Times Bank people did not believe me. There were quite a few of them whom I wanted to retain, but they left. Almost as a tribute. When I left, Sudhir took over from me. That is reflective of the fact that we wanted to build a culture of meritocracy. Just because someone came from the conqueror's side does not mean that he always remained on top. So this says most of it, that HDFC Bank believed in getting and retaining the best talent and also integrating people. As I was reading out earlier, the head of HR was from the organization which we acquired. So that gives a strong signal that as a bank, we believed in culturally integrating people of an acquired entity. That's all I wanted to share with you. And this book, Bank for the Book, could not have served me in better stead than getting released in time. And rather than me articulating few of my thought, this has come out to reflect what HDFC Bank stood for. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Chakrabarty. I'm glad this book came out just now so that you could tell us about it. And David, I know you've just landed, but I have to turn not the guns, but question from your side, because you are an outside-in view, and we would be very interested to know from you. But before Mr. Chakrabarty actually talked about good practices. And let me share some example that I had in the recent past. I was part of a 10-member team, out of which 6 members were from UK, and we had about 4 members from India. We did work here, and mainly it was risk advisory work in India, in one of the remotest parts of the country. And so that was led by a partner from UK, and from our side, I was leading. And we had the team together, and it was amazing that what could, by bonding, by having a dinner on the opening day, by knowing each other on a first-name basis, what it could do when we landed on the ground the next day. Actually, what we learned, and he spoke about getting the best from everybody. We, from the UK team, learned that to work in an Indian environment, you have to adapt yourself to the behavior. I know they had sent a request for information about 2 pages long about the documents that they needed before they started off on the assignment. When I landed there, actually nothing was available, because the team in India was not used to it, and they were not able to grapple as to what exactly information was needed. So I actually sat down with the client's team and sat with him together from 6 o'clock till 12 o'clock in the night, explained each and every line item as to what it meant, and then I had it all for them the next day. From the UK team, we learned, because one day was actually spent on planning, and planning was, because it was a deadline-driven assignment to be finished in 15 days' time on the field, and it was also, the planning was done in such a manner where accountabilities, responsibilities were clearly drawn down. The reporting lines were clearly drawn up, tasks were very clearly defined, and we could see that each one knew that what one had to do. It was almost like an orchestra, and we would brief each other every second day so to know what progress we had done and milestones were. So we actually could understand. It's not that we don't do planning, here. We do planning, but maybe, and that is something I learned because it was a cross-cultural. And from the client I learned, because they were always not coming across with the information. And I was not able to understand that if they are also speaking in English, but why is it that, and we are also speaking in English, but why is it client so hesitant? Because with us, whatever we wanted, we were getting. And in the evening, the leader, the client team member actually very sheepishly told me, Tapan, the problem is my boys are not able to understand the accent. So please, you have to be there with the team. And that is when I understood the importance of hand-holding. I briefed that to my team, but we got it there. So David, with that, just to share with you some example, it was an audit assignment, so I knew how difficult it can be. You have been coming to India for the last decade or so, and you have not only worked in UK, but various parts of globe. When you come to India and you have worked with teams in India, do you have to change your style? Do you have to adapt yourself? You have worked with Indian team members. Is there anything that you would want to share with us so that we can learn from your experience?
Thank you, Tapan. I think India is but one country in the world, and maybe just standing back from the question a little bit. When we talk about multiculturalism and when we talk about working in different cultures, we very often think about that in terms of nationalities or particular groups of people and the way they behave and the way they go about doing things. And actually it's much more complex than that, because people individually behave and do things the way they do, not just because of the country they come from and the background they have, but also the company they work in, which has its own culture very often. And then their individual background. People are individuals. And I think my experience of working in India and elsewhere, I think what I learned very quickly was to get to the individual and understand the individual first. And if you can do that, and I think it's interesting, your story about having dinner with these guys who came in from the UK on the assignment you referred to. I think if you can get to know what motivates people individually, you are able to work with them a lot better, more quickly than if you make a lot of generalizations and presumptions about what is driving them and how they will behave. And that comes down to then understanding, what is motivating them to succeed. What in their own personal style would lead them to question what you're asking them to do, or not question what you're asking them to do. So you have to really slow down, I think, working in different cultural environments. You have to really take the time to try and understand what it is that's driving people to work the way they do, and try then to fit your own personal style into that. So, to give them very clear instructions. When we're used to working in our own culture, we're used to making an assumption about what people understand. When you ask them to do something, or you ask for some information, you make assumptions about how much of that people understand, and the nuances that we use in our everyday interaction with people in our own local cultures are very alien to people outside of that culture. and you have to actually get behind that and understand, you know, how you need to communicate to get the best out of people. So for me, I think, you know, working in India has been a really rewarding and enlightening experience, because you start to understand what drives individuals to work in the best way. In fact, I was going to use a very similar example to the one that you used, Tapan. My first experience working in India was about 14, 15 years or so ago now. And I was working for a big American technology company, and they had some real issues in one of their Indian subsidiary businesses. And that was my first experience of working with my colleagues in India, but also with that company in this environment. And the biggest mistake I made, and the biggest lesson I learned, was that I came in and talked to people in the same way as I would have done if they were in my home environment. I gave them my own team here instructions on how to do what I wanted done in the way that I would have done if I'd been sitting in London. And whether it was the nuance of the language, or whether it was people not understanding the accent, or whatever it was, 2 weeks later, surprise, surprise, they hadn't done what I was expecting them to do. And so I had to come back down, and we spent another week just going through and understanding, you know, more and more of what it was we needed to do. And I asked them, you know, what was it? Why have you not got done what I thought you were going to do? And we went back through the expectation again. And it was because they said, because there were half-finished sentences, there were things you were saying we really didn't understand what you were asking. And we made the assumption ourselves about what that was, and we went off and did as best we could, but those two things weren't aligned. And if I'm honest, one of the interesting characteristics, I think, not only of working in India, I think across Asia it's also common. Sometimes people don't challenge you. They won't necessarily say up front, I don't understand what you're asking me. Please give me more. Please help me to understand that. And that you have to appreciate about the culture of working in that particular environment. And therefore you have to give more up front. You have to explain more. You have to be very, very clear in what you want people to do. So for me, it's all about just slowing down, treating people as individuals, understanding what motivates them, what drives them, what they need to know before they can do what you want them to do. And the same applies if you're auditing in a particular environment. You know, the people you're interacting with, the auditees, if you can call them that, don't necessarily understand you if you make assumptions that they're working on the same wavelength that you do in your culture. So it's about slowing down, it's about understanding individuals, and I think that gets to the root of how we deal across cultures.
That's excellent, David. Sorry, guys, I have a caller mic, I forget. That's excellent. In fact, let me tell you a secret about David. You know, he and I work very closely together, and there are two secrets I'll let you. David still, after having come to India for more than 14, 15 years, he still does not understand our nodding of head, you know. He will always ask me, is the guy saying yes or no? Please explain. Not that I always understand. And I'll tell you, 3 months back, 3 or 4 months back, we had to go for a meeting in town, you know, and we were in our car, which was I think one of the cars, Maruti Dzire or something. We were both sitting next to each other, and we were in, can you believe it, in Crawford Market, and you know the traffic over there, you know, and then I see there is a truck, which is a 10-tonner, coming our way, you know, and coming this way, you know, on the wrong side, and almost inching, and then almost on top of our car, and I was getting panicky. And David, and now I know he's almost an Indian, he said, nothing will happen. You relax, mate. Nothing. He's going to stop just 1 inch before he hits us, okay? And that is how it was, you know. So talking about multicultural, here is a man who is working born and brought up in UK, but knows maybe India better than I do, which is Excellent, which is amazing. So each time on Bombay roads, I am reminded of, I always remember him, you know. So David wouldn't have reacted like this. Don't panic. So with that, and I have actually born and brought up in Eastern India, then did my studies in North India, then back to again East India, and then back to North India again during my career, and now to Western India. So, and it has, I think, made me a better person. It has, I've tried to embrace the city wherever I have worked, and it's about the language. When you are in Delhi, you have to be a Delhiwala, and you have to speak that language. When you are in Mumbai, you have to speak that language. So I have kind of picked up the Tapori language now, kind of, and I always say kya after finishing a sentence, you know, the way Mumbaikars would speak, which feels one way that I am integrating, which is good. With that, further ado, Sumita, I would like to, I don't know, some of you might have seen is the Leena Nair, who has now been from Hindustan Unilever, who was the HR head in Hindustan Unilever. You must have read the papers. She has been appointed she is the vice president, senior vice president, Unilever now. And one of the reasons that choice was made, it's there in the article, is because Indians, it is felt, can manage cultural diversity much more than others, because within the country itself, there is so much of diversity. What is happening in the north, Rajma Chawal is the staple food. I'm sure Rajma Chawal cannot be the staple food in South India, at least it's not in Eastern India, okay? So there is so much of difference. With that, Sumita, question to you with your experience. Do you think managing and leading people from various parts of the same country pose a challenge? And if yes, how have you dealt in your capacity as head of your audit department? And does it in any way impact the way the audit is performed? And how do you piece it all together so there is one common thread? Some experiences you would like to share with us, please.
Yeah, good evening to all of you. And taking off from what Tapan has just said, am I audible? Okay. Before I tell you about how we have managed cultural diversity in the company, it's important to take you a bit into the history and the geography of Bharat Petroleum. Actually, Bharat Petroleum is the erstwhile Burma Shell. The company is almost over. I would say the refinery was set up in 55, but the marketing company, a trading company existed long before that. Burma Shell came into India with its own set of systems, procedures, very British. I mean, everything was in the rule book. The company was nationalized in 1976 and it became Bharat Petroleum. And in 76, we inherited each and every system process from Burma Shell. That continued till 2000. Now, this 2000 is a deciding factor for Bharat Petroleum because before 2000, we were in a seller's market. No competition. Income was assured. We were under the government pricing mechanism. You just sell, that's it. You get your money. And we were always cash surplus. But sometime in 2009, sometime I think before 2000, we were aware that the oil sector would be deregulated. Now, what did deregulation mean to an oil company at that time, which had spent 50 years in comfort? It meant there would be private oil companies, there would be foreign oil companies setting up refineries and petrol pumps, which means competition. Also, the government has said, now you all fend for yourself. You buy your crude, you refine products, and sell it at the market-driven prices. Now, that was quite, a culture shock for many people who had worked for 30, 40 years without any competition. Sales team had never sold. I mean, many of you would have waited for 2 years for a gas connection and waited for 2 months to get a refill. We never knew what selling was. So what was the challenge before internal audit in the year 2000? Finally, deregulation did come. It happened in 2002. In its own way. I mean, the government said they would keep us free from controls, but it never happened that way. They still have some control, but we are deregulated as far as government subsidies are concerned. We have to sell at the market price. If we sell at less, only then we get some subsidy. Now, as internal auditors, we realized that till deregulation, that is 2000, we were really a checklist and cycle-driven auditors. I mean, there was nothing much to audit, except sometimes we used to go in for checking pilferage of products. Even 50 years back, oil pilferage was quite profitable. But beyond that, I think, yeah, some other audit areas were, what are we doing with the surplus funds? Now when we look back, and we are actually cash-strapped because we buy crude at $110 and $20, but the value of the product equivalent is $60, we are actually cash-strapped. So the business environment changed, the company's scenario changed, and it put a fresh set of challenges before internal audit. We noticed a lot of culture change within the company. First thing was the company went in for restructuring. Earlier we had what's known as functional company. We had different functions, sales. They would sell everything from petrol, diesel, LPG, lubricants. But we moved into specific selling business units. We had retail who would only manage the petrol pumps. We had LPG who would manage your gas. We had a separate small company called lubricants. They would only market lubricants, a highly competitive company. Now, all the systems, procedures had to be dovetailed to the new business units. We also we migrated from EDP to SAP, and we gave more authorities we moved authorities from regional offices to, I would say, the field. So a decision which was being taken, say, in Bombay on sales promotion now could be taken at Ahmedabad and by a fairly junior marketing manager of the territory. This means, as an auditor, we had to actually revamp our entire audit process. We had to look at where the risks lie, and I'll just narrate some of the areas where we felt that it was quite a risky affair. There was a risk of bypassing systems and procedures to achieve targets. Because just after deregulation, suddenly there was a thrust in going and grabbing new customers, putting up new retail outlets. So there was always this risk at the back of our mind that there could be a possibility of bypassing systems and procedures. And there was a risk of achieving targets, but not how it was achieved, bypassing operational maintenance. Then there was this thing called team versus individual dynamics. Through our audits, we noticed that it was becoming difficult to fix personal accountability where things do go wrong. There was cultural diversity between business units. Retail business wouldn't see eye to eye with lubricants. So although they were selling the similar product to the same set of customers, I mean, they started becoming different because they were two different profit centers. And then there was this thing called regional diversity within business units among various plants. You could have a refinery in Mumbai with a typical Mumbai culture where things get done very fast. You could have a refinery in Kerala. They still are very meticulous. And then you could have a refinery in a place called Assam, where they actually are submissive culture, very new. And they will look for some direction between Mumbai and Kerala, deciding where to go. So when we redefined our audit programs, or we guided our refineries how to take forward their audit plans, we had to build in these cultural finer nuances into the audit plans. And where we find that the culture is abiding by systems and processes, our work becomes simpler. But wherever we find that there is a tendency to resort to shortcuts to achieve quick results, I think that's the time when we have to go in for intensive audit, and we call it the in-depth audit or mining into data, far more than we would do in a normal cursory audits. So this is where we felt the impact in a changing scenario after restructuring.
Just following on that, Sumita, I just have a question that you spoke about, Kerala and Mumbai and Assam. But in terms of, in your team structuring, when your internal audit teams go out to audit in these parts, or you have people, there are two aspects. A, your IA team has people from different parts of the country, I mean, internal audit team themselves, and also your auditee who are different, I mean, they reside in. Is there some kind of training, or is there some particular, a common thread that you consciously build with your team so that, these things are factored into, and how do they kind of handle that? Something on that would be good for us to know.
Us being an all-India company, we have audit teams in Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, Kochi, and we oversee the audit in Assam and Central India, that is Madhya Pradesh. The common thread that we have is, although the company may be divergent regionally and culturally, internal audit is not divergent. I would say it's a very fairly well-disciplined professional body, and when there's a new entrance coming in, whether as a fresher or a mid-management, they undergo a training. The first thing they learn is the process and systems and processes backwards. Before they start an audit, they have to know every part of the system and process. So much so that when they actually go for an audit, a young CA, he's asked, how is it that you know so much, which we haven't learned over 2 years? So what we do is we focus on their training. Secondly, we do a lot of mentoring, and we are today connected through video conferencing. A youngster in Kolkata starting an audit in Jamshedpur cannot go to the field unless he makes a pre-audit presentation. And that must fall within our quality of our own set of new guidelines that we have set out. They have extensive IT training given to them. So what we do is, to manage this diversity across the company coming out of restructuring, we have at least kept the audit team consistent in as much as they actually become a binding force. Wherever they go, they spread the message that this is important, this is not being done. So it's quite a I would say that audit acts as a glue binding the company at this stage.
Thank you, Sumita. That's very heartening to know that we act as a glue. So from rock stars to glue, that is, I mean, that's the breadth of our qualities. So we are the common thread that binds it or pieces it all together. Mrs. Chakrapani, another follow-on for you is that in terms of, you have spoken about how you have handled the acquisitions, but more from an IA perspective. I would like to know that, we would be happy if you could share, because you have spoken about, acquisitions which have been very different, acquisitions which is banks which have been deep-rooted in their custom traditions, but, and there are banks which have been maybe were new and more aggressive. But I am sure you would have to kind of imbibe in them a common sense of, values, core values of your parent bank. In that aspect, the shall we say, the importance of systems and processes, and also the audit aspects, the importance of audit. How would, as an internal audit, you were able to kind of get them all together? Did you have to play a role in that, and was it, and if things didn't happen, why the way it should have happened, why it didn't happen? Any thoughts on that?
I still vividly remember first few audits, we consciously as internal audit will be abiding as saying that, in any organization which get integrated with another organization, One is, it's already been said, and the obvious have been stressed, that integrating of people is as important as integrating processes. Here the role of HR plays a very key role in doing this. And next important department in doing this, according to me, is an internal audit. The internal audit department is one department which travels the length and breadth of the country to take what David has said. We have to slow down and understand people, understand what is that, rather than getting to understand the culture. Culture is again belonging to each individual. So one distinct advantage that an internal audit group has is that ability or the authority to travel, and the one department where it has authority and also the responsibility to make an assessment. You make assessment about working of a branch, and if you're going to make an assessment of a working of a branch, you are indirectly making an assessment about the working of a branch manager. And if you're going to make an assessment about the branch manager, you're going to even make an assessment about the people under him. So you have actually the power and the authority to actually do an assessment. When you're doing that assessment, it's always important to keep what are the earlier type of processes, or the imbibing certain things which they followed, and during this transition, how it takes a natural path for them to actually get converged, or there is where the point of conversion which is happening. As internal audit, when we actually understand, as the challenge is, before you even audit, during the period of transition, you need to understand, you as an internal audit group, you will be very well versed with your set of processes, your set of guidance. But another organization who still yesterday had their own way of dealing, you can't be putting and measuring from your way of dealing. You need to understand what their guidelines was, what was their process, what was their hierarchical approach, and measure them. Yes, we had unique experiences in terms of auditing. So the first and foremost, we said when this happened that they all know internal audit in HDFC Bank is extremely what you call process oriented. They will come and evaluate. The first thing which I said was saying that for me, the conversion is very important in terms of you adopting processes. While I will be open to looking at best processes in you and adopting, but that will be as a subsequent phase. First phase is let's integrate what processes HDFC Bank is following. So first phase of audit will be more as a learning. There is nothing which we will measure you against, which we will never rate you against, which will not be held against you, which was an important assurance or important message which was shared with them, which helped them saying that yes, which gives a lot of feeling of comfort, saying that the process and procedures are being implemented or being audited for the benefit of the employees. It's not saying that it's been superimposed on them. So there was a migration time which was given, and we could understand what, according to that standard, what the processes should have been followed, rather than from the day one itself, no, our processes say that you have not done this, then we have not given the benefit of the hindsight, or that is before their merger. So this helps to actually to bring them into the fold, understand that yes, the integration was a clear thing, but there was time available for them to do the transition and make that conversion process more smoother. From an internal auditor's perspective, very, very clearly that we had formed regional team to take care of the regional nuances thing. As I was mentioning, there are 150 to 170 branches which is coming from one single state, which is Kerala, another 300 branches coming from Punjab, and maybe another 200 branches from Western India. So it was very important for me to take that local level understanding of people to set up a regional audit team. But again, taking from ma'am what she said, that internal audit was one department which was not only understanding their HDFC Bank process, but also took 1.5 to 2 months time to understand what the other bank processes were. because the auditing has to be done according to their standard and their prescription. So, which was very well received. And when we said it took 6 to 9 months for this entire transition to happen, but in this 6 to 9 months, the employees of the bank which we acquired or which got merged with us could be very appreciative that audit is not very dogmatic in only superimposing, but they could understand that what was relevant at relevant point of time they audited. And the first audit was more a sharing and giving them the perspective of why this. So everywhere if they ask, saying that if why this process was not being followed, them and why need to be followed, my auditor has the role and responsibility not only making a comment, but explaining to them what is the logic, what is the risk, why is it being done. If he doesn't able to explain, even I can recall instances when branch manager used to call me at the remotest of branch that your auditor is, that particular auditor is not able to explain me. Can you please explain to me? We will follow it from next day. So always it was more out of making a meaning out of the changes we are suggesting and making them convinced that the logic wins. This helps us to bridge so many things, and in the next say 9 months to 12 months, we could see a dramatic change in the way in which these branches or these units which we acquired functioning, and the entire process of integration was smooth. Everybody started imbibing. It was not forced upon. So they could realize that it is in the interest of every one of us to follow a single way in which an organization of two merged entity functions. In between, we had the system integration. So there also, we had a lot of issues in terms of how to integrate system. There also the logic and process of the best practices one, and I could say that this is the smoothest ever could be seeing that banks which are basically transaction oriented and customer affecting thing where you can't have a downtime of any of the transaction going. The entire transition from their integration point out was very smooth. This could not have achieved but for understanding and appreciating each other's at different point of time.
Thank you, Mr. Chakrapani. Going on from there, David, one question, and this is true for, I think, Indian companies which have become transnational, and as CAEs, I think you would also be grappling with that issue, and I have always, because this is going to, because you have your companies or subsidiaries various parts of the globe, and there would be, and we know we are, the listed companies definitely are mandated to, the internal auditors are mandated to kind of present it to the audit committee, so you have to meet up with the deadlines. So within a certain quarter, you have deadlines to meet, and you have to kind of present the findings not only of your entities in that particular country, but from across the globe. I am sure as you deal with MNCs which are headquartered in UK, but which have subsidiaries across the globe and spanning across, say, from North America to the Far East to Japan. And you did mention about knowing the individual, but sometimes you don't have the time to know the individual. You don't, because you are doing it on a remote basis, maybe at the most that you can know about is through conference call is the voice. So in these kind of pressure situations, when you know you have a particular deliverable, how do you deal with the situation that, you know, that about deadlines, about uniformity of reports, of the uniformity of the deliverables, of the language that it is communicated in? How do you deal with this? Because I think that's a big challenge, and more Indian companies are dealing with that challenge. What has been your experience? What works?
Well, I mean, I think if I look back at my own experience, what's worked for me best is where we have worked across the world. Let me use an example. Probably the most multinational engagement I've ever led was a team of about 65 people operating across 26 countries on every continent except for Antarctica. So it was pretty multinational.
Yes, we can see that.
Now,
Yes. India was there?
India was absolutely
Okay.
there, yeah.
Okay, good to know
India
that.
was there.
Yeah.
And very quickly at the outset of that project, we realized that it was not going to work if we used people in each of those 26 countries and let them quietly get on with what they thought was going to be the right thing to do. So we worked on a principle of deploying people from the headquarter country into the local, each of those 26 territories, and they worked alongside members of the team that were drawn from those countries as well. So we had the best of both worlds. We had local expertise, we had local language capability, local cultural appreciation of what it was like to work in that environment, together with people who were familiar with what the headquarter company was expecting, the standard that they set, their approach to deadlines and the way we managed the timeline of the engagement, and what their expectations were, together with, and probably the most important feature of all of this, was the big picture understanding of how the whole project kind of hung together. And one of the issues you bump up against when you end up doing work in remote locations is no matter how hard you try to communicate clearly and explain why we're doing what we're doing, sometimes the big picture is lost, because the understanding of what the parent organization is actually looking for and the reason they're looking for it, the problem they're trying to solve in the first place, just isn't understood or isn't appreciated. People default to functional skills and expertise rather than standing back and trying to understand the big picture of what it is they're trying to achieve. We addressed that in that particular example by mixing the teams up with people from outside the territory and people from inside the territory to make that work. Now, I think, again, just standing back from that, it's interesting because a month or so ago, and you know this, right? A month or so ago, I had a bit of a landmark birthday. So it's one of those birthdays that forces you to sometimes reflect back on what you've learned in life and how things have moved and how things have changed. And one of the things that I reflected on was that in the 27 years that I've been working in PwC and the business that I work in, how different that was now compared to what it was like in the early 80s when I first joined that business. And in London, if you can imagine what it might have been like, we were largely white, Anglo-Saxon, and male, all right? And that was kind of the makeup of our business. I now work in a business which is 165,000 people, and I'm struggling to remember the number of countries we operate in, but it's somewhere in the region of 80-odd countries around the world. The business that I work in London, just my local business, is quite big. It's about 800 people, so it's about, I don't know, about four times the size of this room in terms of composition. And when I knew I was coming to...
That's your team.
It's not my team, it's the business that I work in. But when I knew I was coming to talk today, I did a quick tally of how many nationalities are represented in that group of 800 people. And there are over 30 different nationalities represented in that group. Of my partner group in London, then there are about 35 partners, the senior people in that business in the UK. 10 of those were not British. They come from Australia, they come from Canada, they come from Latin America, they come from various parts of Europe. We are increasingly a cosmopolitan, multinational team of people. And I'm not saying we're unique. I think if I look across similar organizations to ours around the world, that is increasingly the trend. People have moved around the world. They've gone to get different experiences. They have migrated from one place to another. And in doing that, they've enriched the places they've gone to. And sometimes they then returned home and enriched with that experience as well. So I think we're increasingly used to dealing with an environment where there are different cultures and different things to understand. We're not brilliant at it always, and one of the things I think we struggle with, and I'd be interested to hear from people in the room whether you also think you have this issue. I don't think we train people very effectively to work in different cultures. I think largely that is done through assimilation and you kind of, you pick it up as you go along. There's very little formal, I think, training for people yet in how to work with different cultures. But I think it will be one of the cornerstones of success for people working in our profession across the world in the future. Absolutely, I think we need to have foundation core skills around understanding processes and understanding the business environment that we operate in. But the leverage thing that will attach to people who are really going to be successful in the future is the ability to understand how to work across different cultures. And I think gradually that's happening. And, as I say, I look over the last quarter of a century that I've been in the work environment, how dramatically that has changed. And the difference it has made to people who work in my business and in the businesses that I visit as client organizations of our firm. So, sorry, a little bit of a rambling answer, Tapan, but
Yeah.
I think there's a tip there in terms of how to handle matching people up to work in different cultures, but also making the most of what you've got in your organizations. And if you look around, I'm sure most organizations represented in this room will have a multicultural aspect to them in some way, shape or form, whether it's different regions of India, whether it's different cities in the country, or whether it's different countries that you all operate in. Make the most of that and try to get that represented in your teams. I do a lot of work with one of the major multinational integrated oil companies, and they have a very sizable audit function, around 150 people or thereabouts. And one of the constant challenges they face is getting that same representation of people from all of the territories they operate in. And you will know, being in that industry, some of the places that the oil and gas industry operate in are remote, they're far-flung. It isn't easy to get good quality people to go and work in those environments, let alone people who will go into those environments and will be able to quickly pick up and understand the culture that they're working in. So everybody that I see and work with struggles with this same issue, but they're all doing what they can to try and work towards using the talent inside their organizations to help them address it. So that's just my thoughts.
Thanks, David. So we are almost coming to the end of this session. Few thoughts here is David spoke about a landmark birthday, and which I also spent some time back, landmark birthday, and he talked about the changes. I see one change which I have myself, which is digressing a bit from this topic of IA leadership in multicultural teams. The one change that I find is that I remember I go back to my times and I couldn't dare to ask my boss after 10 years of being, or 8 years in PwC, after becoming a senior manager, I dared to ask him, what is my career path? Okay. These days, people who come for interviews, I mean, he's just qualified in November or exam January, and he's sitting in front of me in February, and before I can ask any question, he says, what is my career path? So that is the change that I have seen. But without casting any aspersions or apprehensions, but this is something we must be aware of. We are told that this is a new generation, and we all know that, and our teams are going to have people of new generation, and good for us for that, because their adaptability to technology and weaving teams together, I think technology in terms of whether it is the Facebook or the Twitter, both, everything can be used they work like, at same time, they work like that. Those are the things that can be used